He has wiped out by his grace through faith in Christ your every sin, past, present, future.
Christian hedonist is somebody who says that my greatest joy, my greatest good is God. And therefore, I will pursue that joy and I will pursue that God above all else. So God's glorified and I'm satisfied.
You are now listening to the Pastor Discussions podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 69 of the Pastor Discussions podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Joe, and this is your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.
And we're going to do something a little bit different this week. We are going to answer some questions that
from our own perspective.
From our own perspective, exactly. Some of these questions we actually have experience with, and most of them center around church revitalization, but a lot of them are applicable to all sorts of different situations. So let's get into it. Do we have anything else to talk about? I don't think we have anything.
Let's just go into it.
Let's do this. Pause this episode and go check out thebarpodcast.com and then subscribe to all of the podcasts on that website, and then go order some Resurrection coffee, come back, unpause it. Okay, you're back now, so let's go. All right, so I've got 6 questions here. Let's start with this one.
Do you think we can get through 6 questions?
I think so. That's why we're not doing any intro thing. Okay. All right, here we go. What constitutes revitalization? What makes revitalization different than just typical ways a church needs to grow?
That's a good question,
isn't it?
Because every church, whether it's unhealthy or healthy, is always in some respect revitalizing.
Yeah.
So do we need to distinguish between or just being at a church and pastoring versus like what we would call church revitalization? Church
revitalization is a big buzzword. We did an episode with Brian Croft a while back, and he pointed that out. It's sort of like this big buzzword that's going around now. And I think rightly so, because a lot of people are recognizing that there are a lot of unhealthy churches, like seriously unhealthy churches. We're not talking about churches that need to grow in health. We're talking about like sick, dying churches.
Sick and don't know it.
Yeah, sick and don't know it, or dying on the verge of death. Like the death rattle is happening in the church.
What's a death rattle?
It's like when you're about to die and your respiration gets all raspy and
gotcha.
Like that.
That reminded me of like something from Family Guy.
I've never watched that show.
You never watched Family Guy?
I've never watched it. I never got into it. I've seen a couple clips, but
I see clips here and there. I've watched a few episodes. It's not worth watching. So.
All right. So when we're talking about revitalization, I think just to sort of clearly define terms, we're talking in that context. There's churches that are very sick, very unhealthy, dying, or on the verge of death, like they're declining.
Yep.
So when we talk about revitalization, that's what we're talking about. Beyond that, every church needs to grow in health. Like that's just part of we're never going to be perfect in this world. The church is always going to have problems.
Yeah, we never arrive. And that includes the church.
Exactly.
Because unarrived people are running the church.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so I think that one of the main distinctions there is the church in a general state of health? I would recommend 9 Marks of a Healthy Church by Mark Dever.
He leaves stuff out though.
He does. There's something, but it's a good starting point. It's a good start. We have about 12 Marks of Healthy Church. The expanded edition. You can read the first 6 by Mark and the second 6 by us. We haven't published that yet, but add that to the list.
I was going to say, we've got like a running list of things.
So when we're talking about I think the main difference with revitalization is, and like you pointed out, the church might not even know that they're unhealthy. And
that's probably the harder one too.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one thing if a church is like, man, we're really in trouble. We need to get somebody to come help us with this. this more willing to at least acknowledge the changes that need to be made. The changes that need to be made are always difficult and always hard and never easy to do. And even when people recognize that they need to change, a lot of times there's resistance to it because it's uncomfortable. But to come into a church that doesn't realize that they're unhealthy, that's challenging.
And churches can look from an external perspective healthy. You can have great numbers, you can have great giving, and be extremely broken and unhealthy spiritually. So and if you get in situations like that, that's really hard too.
So maybe we need to add two subcategories to revitalization. And one is there are churches that are in need of revitalization because it's very visible externally that they're unhealthy. In other words, they're declining in numbers. People aren't showing up, things like that. And then there's an internal lack of health that is maybe harder to spot, but just as dangerous.
Yeah.
Because a church can die with big numbers if it abandons the gospel, or if people aren't growing in their faith, or they're not being the church.
Yeah, I mean, the church has a mission, and if there's an unwillingness to actually go out and execute that on that mission and act on that, then that's a big sign that you're not very healthy.
Yeah. So I think the approach is maybe a little bit different for a church revitalization as we've defined it.
It's very muddy water.
Yeah, and it's like walking through a minefield with a blindfold. You're just not sure what you're going to step up on, and it's going to blow up and cut your leg off. So I think it's a different beast. Whereas all pastors everywhere should be leading their congregations toward a healthier view of the church, a healthier view of the gospel, a healthier walk with the Lord, all of those types of things.
Okay, so what was the question again?
Okay, what constitutes revitalization, and what makes revitalization different than just typical ways that the church needs to grow? So the second part of that question is what makes it different?
So what makes it different than
just ordinary pastoring towards greater health?
I think pace.
Yeah.
So you've used this term a lot. Like, there's triage that happens in revitalization. There's a lot of things I think as we come into churches, we've got big ideas. Whether you're in the preaching role or you're in a different role, more of a come alongside role, you have goals and you have thoughts on where you're going to try to go. And when you're in revitalization mode, like, going too fast is a big thing that I think most of us would do when we get somewhere, because everyone's excited.
Yeah.
You're a lot of times when you're coming into a church, you're a newer person. I wasn't. I grew up in this church before. I came on staff as one of the pastors, so a little different. But most places you go, I've been here when new guys have come in. There's excitement, and people are willing to listen, maybe a little more in that beginning time. So sometimes you can get some things done, but you need to pick what you want to, like, okay, where is somewhere that I need to, what's something that I need to attack right now?
Yeah.
That I need to address immediately while I have people's attention, while you're in that honeymoon phase.
What do I have the collateral to be able to address?
So like picking battles is really important, and your pace.
Patient urgency.
That sounds so, I understand what you're saying. Like, I completely get it, but it just sounds so.
Because I think there's a tension, because there's so many things that need to be addressed. Right. And there's an urgency in them because the church is in decline, but there's got to be a tactical patience in there. And sometimes it's taking opportunities that you might not have seen coming that are just presented and that are going to work toward church health. And sometimes it's like, this is a big problem that needs to be addressed head on.
And realize that you don't do the changing.
Yeah.
Like, you might be the conduit that God's going to use to do the changing, and change happens over time.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing with patience is when you're coming into a revitalization, unless you've been there for a long time, which I don't know of a lot of situations where there's been a pastor that's led the church for 20 years and they come into revitalization and that's the guy that revitalizes, because there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of, like, honestly, I don't mean this in a negative way, but if there's a pastor that's been there for 20 years and the church has needed revitalization,
he's probably part of the issue.
He's part of the issue. Yeah. So, so most of these cases, I think, are people coming in and recognizing that you have to earn the credit to be heard.
Realize you are now steering a really big ship.
Yeah.
And you can't turn on a dime.
Yeah.
It takes time, and it takes consistency, and it takes wisdom in knowing, okay, I'm going to press here, and I'm going to press here for a little while until we get going in a good direction, and then I'll move to the next thing.
Micro corrections.
Right. Like, it can take, like, do you have a 7 to 10 year plan?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's going to take. You've got, most of the time in church revitalization, there's tradition problems that have been around for a long time, and you don't just get rid of those things. I mean, you can, but that's a big mistake. And I think I've learned some of these things the hard way by just trying to get rid of something real quick. That is something that is going to actually hinder people from seeing where you're trying to lead.
Yeah.
So don't take. No, I won't use my example, but like I've done some things that I would have done differently if I could go back and do it, because I've seen how those things have actually hurt people and how they were unwise.
Yeah.
And they didn't match where we were even going. They were things that I was like, oh, this is an idol, I'm going to take it away from you.
Yeah.
Instead of, I'm going to take it away from you, but I'm going to dismantle it and take it away. So over time, and it's going to be a slow process. So, I mean, each situation, like you said, is different. So there's not like well, here's what you do.
No silver bullets.
Like there's principles here of, like we've talked about, patience, using wisdom, triage. Don't do everything at one time.
Yeah.
And then
build up the relational credit to be able to.
There's a trust that God's going to do things over time, and it's not me that has to do it. So there's just some general principles as you go into those things, and that's really hard when you're coming in somewhere new, and it's just like, let's go.
Whereas if you have been there for a while and the church is generally healthy, you'll be able to say, hey, we need to move this direction. And it's more micro. It's not like the ship needs to turn 180 degrees. It needs to turn 4 degrees.
Yep.
And just to avoid an upcoming iceberg or something.
Right. So that's kind of the difference, is like, in one, the ship is going the wrong direction, and you're coming, you want to turn it really hard, really fast. And in the other situation, the ship's generally going the right direction, but it needs to make just small maneuvers.
Corrections.
So that's a good analogy of what it's kind of like to come into that, and what the differences are in revitalization versus just leadership.
All right. Second question. How often revitalization is very discouraging and lonely for our wives? Mm. How can we encourage them? Ooh.
Why don't you, like, I'd love to hear some. I think these are ones that are, so
that's a lot of sounds.
Yes. Well, I was just like, I think our wives, I'll speak for mine, like, it's really lonely.
Yeah.
There's almost this thought that, well, okay, a pastor's wife is supposed to look like this from the body. So if the pastor comes in and there's an expectation on her to do this, and that expectation comes without any relationship.
Yeah.
And so what our wives wind up feeling, especially for younger guys, and a lot of what I see is, I'm going to protect my wife. I'm going to protect my family. So we do that, and sometimes we isolate our wives and our families from the church just for that, because we don't want them to get hurt, and we don't want them to go in and like have the appearance and even the feeling of having a relationship with somebody, but all they're doing is just well, you're the pastor's wife, so you're supposed to do this.
Yeah.
So then it gets really isolated and just really hard. Like, and even in when you have friendships, like sometimes our wives can feel like, well, they don't really want to hang out with us. The only reason they want to hang out with us is because you're the pastor.
Right.
And I'm just along for that ride.
Yeah.
I would like get to find those 2 or 3 or 4 families that you can that want to build into you.
Yeah.
As a pastor and as your family. And let your spouse build those relationships. Don't protect to the point where they can't ever actually trust anyone.
Yeah.
That they're around. And then I would have honest conversations with those families.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think as pastors, it's kind of scary to tell somebody what you really think about something, especially if you're struggling with something, or there's a sin that you're struggling with. Like, having honest conversations with those families and with those people that you trust. I cannot imagine trying to do this work and shepherd people without having some really tight, trusted relationships. Like, it would be so lonely. And yet we a lot of times set our wives up to do exactly what we're afraid to do and what would be really hard for us to do.
And they're not necessarily relationships inside of the body.
That's another thing.
So I think there's a couple of big ideas that need to be considered in this. Number one, know your wife and know her personality and what she needs. So Carly is really tough. She can handle a lot, but she's also a people pleaser. And so there was one instance where a lady came up and was complaining about something that I was doing to her. And I went and confronted that person and said that was inappropriate. If you've got an issue with the decision that was made or the direction that we're going, you need to come talk to me, not my wife. She's not the pastor. And so I have protected her in that way. But then also there have been seeking out specific people in our congregation that are mature and that will love her and love our family, and just being intentional about praying for those people and building relationships with those people together. I think also, like what you were saying with having somebody outside of the body, if you don't have anybody in the church, she needs some relationships with people outside of the body. And then the final thing is like, this is a fine line. This is where, again, knowing your wife is important. Tell her enough where she feels included and part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But don't tell her things that are going to poison her against the church. Because in revitalization, you're just like, you're just going to have people attacking you.
Yeah.
And you're going to have conflict and you're going to have bad stuff happening. And that's knowing when to say, hey, even like I think it was Croft. We were talking with Croft one time, and he was saying his advice was even saying, I'm really struggling right now. I can't give you the specifics, but would you be praying for me?
Yeah.
That brings her in, and she's a part of that.
There's a fine line between those two things. So
yeah,
giving
there is.
Too much information and not giving enough.
Yeah.
Because our wives see things that weigh on us as pastors, and if you're an internal processor, then you normally don't share that with them, and they see something that's wrong and they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Like, there's got to be in some form, whether it's I can't give you the information, it's just there's something that I'm really struggling with some of the people. Like that can be enough information for where she comes alongside you.
Exactly.
And okay, it's not about me, it's not about our family, it's not about that. There's something pastorally that's weighty, and she can pray for that.
Yeah.
But she actually feels a part of that instead of that's your thing, this is my thing.
Yeah.
So that's a hard one. These are like all
these are real life, man.
There's no right answer to like this specific thing and do
that's what I'm
this
saying.
specific.
It just takes wisdom in knowing your wife. You know,
knowing the church too.
yeah.
Like don't be too slow to build relationships, but don't be too quick.
Yeah.
Like you better know the character.
Don't jump into the first relationships because
know the character of the person, know the character of the family. Are they friendly now? Because there's a lot of people when you first show up who want to be best friends because you're new and they seem like they're for you and you can say things, but something will just churn and you'll say something or you'll preach something or you'll teach something that they disagree with and they'll switch just like that. Yeah. And like that's part of like walking that line of being overprotective, and isolation versus just letting everybody take bites out of you.
Yeah.
So,
I think that having some relationships outside of that local congregation, I think, and that might even be you intentionally develop relationships with other pastors in the town, even ones that you might not agree with theologically, but that are preaching the same gospel. Having our wives experience stuff differently than we do.
Yeah.
And just like we need pastor friends, they need pastor wife friends. So it's a good question. All right. This is one I thought we could bat around. How can pastors who serve together at the same church survive the ups and downs of church revitalization together? Long seasons of tension, challenges, discouragement can be challenging to pastoral relationships. I thought this was big because like basically we've
walked this entire thing together so far.
Exactly. Pretty much since I got here. I think 2 weeks after I got here, you were in the office and hanging out with Gabe, and that's where the whole thing started. But yeah, so like I'll speak for myself, like having somebody that we trust was built. I don't think we started talking about stuff the way we talk about stuff now overnight. There was a season of building trust, and but having somebody that I could just be honest with, that I knew me and wasn't going to come down on me, but at the same time was going to ask thoughtful questions or push when I needed to be pushed. So I think that transparency and that honesty between them is really important, because for me, sometimes you just got to get something off your chest. And having somebody that can be a sounding board for you, and you walk through that stuff together. So like, I think it strengthens the relationship more than anything. Like you walk through combat with dudes, and there's a sort of a brotherhood that's forged out of that. And I think in the same way with church revitalization, if there's that trust, if there's the knowing one another and being for one another, that forges a relationship that is stronger than other relationships that don't endure a difficulty like that.
Part of pastoring, I think, is reading people, and reading personalities. So I don't think that happened. So just from my perspective, until probably a year and a half in, where it would go back and forth. So I would say for somebody that, like you, who came into a church revitalization, you were looking for, I think you've told me this, that when you were sent here by the summit, was it Rick, that the pastor's name there? One of the things that he admonished you to do was to find somebody who lines up with you, from a philosophy of ministry and a theological perspective, that would come alongside. Because I mean, we believe that the service has two main parts. There's the corporate singing and the prayer and the reading of scripture as we read those things together, and then there's the preaching, and those things need to tie together. So one of his things was you need to find somebody and pour into somebody who lines up with you to lead that part of it. And so I think one of your goals here was to identify that person. And I don't think you maybe had the intention of the friendship that would come out of that, but having somebody come alongside and pastor together. So you poured into me intentionally and intensely, I would say, for the first year and a half, 2 years that you were here. And then I came on to pastoral staff. And then I think after you had spent that time in discipleship, then the back and forth kind of happened. So I think one of the things that can be forged is you can find or identify that guy that God's called to do that in your local congregation, and then pour into that person.
Yeah.
So a big part of you, and if you're coming into that, and if there's already a pastor there, like having that same mentality that I need to pour into him because I don't know where he's at.
Yeah.
There you can assume that he is on board with everything that you're trying to accomplish, but you don't know those things. So just spending some intentional time. And then I think the last 4 months have been good for our relationship because of some of the things that I'm walking through from a theological perspective. And when I first walked through it, it was a little apprehensive about sharing those things. And then as those things have come out, I think we've had some tense discussions, but I have always walked away from those trusting the other guy's character, and trusting that he's for me and not against me, and he's gonna take what I say and think about it. Like I think that goes both ways.
Yeah.
So like being able to have a relationship like that where you can just, I don't agree with what you're saying, and here's why, and not have like walking away being frustrated with the other guy.
Right. Yeah.
Like that, that's an incredible thing for two pastors to be able to, and so I realize there's some uniqueness to our situation that maybe other guys don't have. But I think just the reason it's that way is because you came in and said, I'm going to invest in this person because it's important to the ministry of the church as we revitalize.
Yeah.
So maybe the advice out of this question is identify that person that, you're Peter, whoever that is, that's going to come alongside me and actually going to help us start to turn this ship. And it's important that he's there. So
I think also finding times to get away from ministry together and just do other stuff.
Yeah.
Whether that's your family's going on a weekend trip or something and getting away, because he says here, long seasons of tension, challenges, and discouragement can be challenging to pastoral relationships. You need to maybe get away from the church for a little bit. I get it. Like you're in the middle of a long season of tension and there's a lot of stuff going on and you're sort of fighting that. You can revitalization moves from one crisis to the next, from one problem to the next. It when you're in that revitalization mode, you can seriously just go the entire time. So even just if you guys are staffed together, we've taken and we've just said, we're getting out of the office today. We're going to Lincoln. We're going to go, you were not excited about it, but to a bookstore and and grab lunch and just do something together. We've had since I've gotten here, we've had once a year, all of the pastors, elders, use those interchangeably, get together and we have a day where we plan, talk about ministry, and then we go do something fun with our families that evening. Just finding ways to relieve that stress and that tension and just build that relationship outside of a ministry context. I mean, we even get together and we'll get together and play cards or have dinner. Our families will have dinner together. So, and sometimes it's talking about ministry stuff, but a lot of times it's not. So yeah, stuff like that. I think that has helped me weather some of those because I can say what's on my mind and get it out, and then we can go have fun, do something.
I think the principles we talked about at the beginning are the same. It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes investment into identifying and then pouring into that person. But realize that you're in it for the long haul. If you're going to a church, if you've been called to a church that needs revitalization, you have to commit to that church for longer than 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So your whole mentality when you come is, okay, this is going to be a 10-year process.
Yeah.
So what do I need to do in years 1 through 3?
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell you, you need to find that person that's going to come alongside you, especially if you're going in as a single pastor, or which that wasn't the case here. There was other guys around that are, hey, we want to go this way, make it happen.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll support you.
Too.
I get that, but
that was a big.
But then you poured into me, and one of those guys was pouring into me too that wanted to go that direction. Now you've got 4. You got 4 guys that are all moving this direction,
and by God's grace, now all of us on the pastoral council, which is what an elder board is, it's a council of pastors. All of us are moving in the same direction, and there's tremendous. I feel like there's tremendous unity, and we all have different gifts, and we recognize that, and we're learning, we're growing, but we're still like we're moving in the same direction, and that makes a huge difference in enduring those ups and those downs.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the next question. We have 4 elders at our church. Is there wisdom in splitting up certain aspects of pastoral ministry between elders, or should all of us be doing the same things? So, example, executive pastor that oversees budget and practical things versus having us all work on these things together.
The only thing that I would say I think is mandatory that we all do together is we shepherd.
Yeah.
We shepherd the flock together. That is something that we do as a plurality.
And involved in that is the oversight and doctrinal and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
But within that, like that oversight aspect, right? We decide things together. I think the best way to function, and this is maybe a personality thing, is to delegate.
Yeah.
If ideally your entire council, when you're together, you trust each other.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's trust and we agree on the barriers of whatever our orthodox is, so we're within whatever we come to an agreement on, and here's the barriers. Okay, guys, go function.
Yeah.
You're the main preacher. We're going to give that responsibility to you. We're going to, whatever your programs are, or however you do discipleship or whatever. Okay, you're going to oversee this and you're going to take care of that. There's got to be that trust. Otherwise, if everybody's trying to do everything and have their foot in everything, you're never going to move.
Nothing's going to happen. Yeah. I think there's a principle of gifting there too. So like, all right, for example, we've got one guy that, man, if we're going to make a decision, he's my go-to guy to find out like how the body's going to perceive that or how the body's going to respond to that. He's just very intuitive with that, and he's got his finger on the pulse of the church. And so like in a lot of different things that we've talked about, he said things like, I don't know if that's going to go well. This probably needs to be drawn out a little bit more. Or, hey, why are we waiting so long on this? Everybody's fine with it. Let's go. We've got another guy that he's able to empathize with people in a way that I'm not able to empathize. And so in recognizing those specific gifts and those specific strengths, I think helps us to delegate better. So, when we were going through installing deacons, I put together, there was a question on deaconesses, on whether deaconesses are biblical. One of my strengths is being able to articulate on paper theology. So like I went through, I did some research, I looked at some texts, I looked at some historical stuff, and I put together a concise sort of brief on where I think the Bible ends up on the issue of deaconesses. That was probably very helpful to the other guys that didn't have the time to do that or wouldn't know where to start with that. And in the same way, those other guys were adding their own strengths in that whole process of, hey, we need to communicate this better, or hey, this is something where we need to teach on a little bit more, or whatever it was. So it's kind of weird because like they've delegated, the pastoral council has delegated to us preaching and the Sunday morning service. And unless there's a problem, they don't really get involved in it. It's like they trust us. So, and in that, I feel like at least initially when I got here, it was sort of my thing. And so now the only thing I worry about on Sunday morning is preaching, because Joe puts together the rest of the service. He puts together the music. He coordinates the welcome and the benediction and all of that, because he's much more gifted at administration than I am. So we're working together to build the service, but even within that, we have our own parts that play to our own strengths. So I think everybody needs to be shepherding. Everybody needs to be involved in the lives of the people. I think all of the elders should be teaching in some form, whether that's one-on-one or in a small group or in...
That's implied, I think, in shepherding.
Exactly. Yeah. But beyond that, when it comes to like ordinary function of the church, I think what you need to do is, I think the best way is to figure out who are the best people to be leading different aspects and empower them to do it, like you were saying.
If we agree together on here's left barrier, here's right barrier, stay within that, and like I think we should be free to ask for input if they want to give it, and then just understanding, hey, if I step out of this, I expect you to say something.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think I think it's almost impossible if everybody tries to have their hands in everything. If you got a guy who does numbers and is great at spreadsheets, because we've got two guys.
We've got two guys, one that's good at spreadsheets and one that's good at numbers.
Yeah.
Josh is good at numbers too, but he's much better at spreadsheets.
Mark's pretty good at spreadsheets too. I've seen him work on them. Like, give that to them for when you're doing your finances. I'm not great at that. I look at a budget and all I want to see is the bottom line numbers.
Yeah.
Like, that's basically, I can learn to look through it, but it's not my strength.
Yeah.
Why not give that to them? And then I'll review it and like, yep, looks good. I trust you.
And then in the same way, we've got another guy that's, normally pretty quiet, but he'll like, hey, we've gotten off track here.
Yeah.
And he'll just like rein us back in and point us back in the right direction. Or, hey, you haven't thought about this. Like, he's good at like coming up with things that, oh, well, yeah, we didn't think about that. And so like having that accountability to one another while delegating those responsibilities. When we were going through the deacon thing, we had some people from the body that were on this sort of, I hate the word, but committee to figure out like what would the language be for the Constitution, since we had to change the Constitution. We had two of our elders serving on that group and leading that group. They were the perfect guys for that.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't have been good for me or you to be doing that. It was them. They were the ones that needed to do that.
Yep.
And so, yeah. All right. So let's do
one more.
Okay. Chairman of Deacons is married to, and I say this one for last. This one should sound very familiar. Chairman of the Deacons is married to the leader in charge of all Sunday school, kids ministry, VBS, etc. She's very controlling and private with stuff. Communication is terrible, and she has a major anger problem. Their daughter is my secretary. She doesn't attend the church. I'm finding it's difficult dynamic, even though I've tried to work with it. What do we do? Oh, man.
Okay, go ahead. Maybe you should speak to this.
I think that this comes down to that triage thing. Toxic leadership, hostile leadership, controlling leadership, church boss type stuff needs to be dealt with because it's detrimental, I think, to the overall health and unity of the church.
Yeah, I would say, is it poisoning the body in some way? Because that kind of, when you come into a church revitalization and you're going to triage, can the pastor withstand an uproar that could cause? And so if it can, is there enough hurt to the body that's being caused, and it's not allowing for growth?
Yeah.
Like, then it might be one of those hard things that you have to step into and you have to do right away. That's, again, like, you've got to look into it and say, okay, is this something I need to hit right away and right now and take care of? Because this is hindering the direction of the church. This is hindering us actually turning a little bit.
Yeah.
Turning that ship just a little bit. Because if it is, you've got to take care of it. Like, you've got to go and hit it head on.
And this is an interesting thing with church revitalization, is you get a lot of sticky situations like this where there's one family that's sort of running the church,
Yeah.
or one family that everybody's looking to. They might be looking to him out of fear. They might be looking to him because they don't know where else to look, and nobody else has stepped up because people aren't willing to step forward and get in their face.
And they might be looking to them too because they don't see the other side of that.
Exactly. And so here's one of the principles that, because we dealt with similar situation. One of the principles that I've found looking back on this in retrospect, bring others into that situation and bring things into the light. Operate in the light. A lot of times church bosses, subversive people, controlling people like to operate in the shadows, where they can have one perception to the body and then control things behind the scenes. You need to find ways to expose that to the light in a way that's corrective and loving, and in the prayer that they'll repent, but at the same time in a way that's exposing that attitude and that behavior to others for them to see, so that when you do finally have to deal with it, if you have to get to that point, there's at least a bulk of people. There's always going to be people that are going to be like roadies.
Yeah.
They're going to be just on board.
You've got to know that when you go and hit that too.
I don't know of any church revitalizer that has dealt with church bosses or controlling people that hasn't lost a portion of their body in dealing with it. And that's not to say that's just like we're indifferent toward that. It's just to say that that's kind of just a reality that you got to accept. And like, to your point, how detrimental is this to the body? How harmful is this to the body? Are you functioning on an elder board where the chairman basically runs the whole thing? Or are you guys willing to outvote him and continuously outvote him till he realizes that things have changed and he voluntarily resigns? Do you have a functional working relationship with the secretary, or is she trying to subversively undermine you and the direction that the church is going? And some of it is like we were talking about last week. I think it was diffusing authority, diffusing authority beyond. So bringing other people in to maybe take over aspects that this other person that's controlling and angry has their hands on. Like, we want everybody to be serving. So who would like to help take this over this year? You know, like diffusing some of that authority out. But I think you got to be wise. You got to be as patient as you can be, given the threat to the unity of the church and the direction of the church. You've got to use wise, patient, and you've got to be as loving as you can in trying to address that. But then at some point, I think there's probably going to be a tipping point where
there normally is. Yeah,
you're just going to have to like call it out as it is. And that, some of that might be my personality coming out, but
I think there's right ways to call it out and wrong ways to call it out. Like, if
we got to a point where it was just it was so unhealthy. It was such an unhealthy leadership culture that it had to be addressed.
One of the things is just from experience is we care about the health of our church, but do we care about the spiritual health of the person who is that church boss?
Yeah.
Like, is there a genuine care? When you go into that situation, maybe they don't hear that, but if you have a genuine care for both the body and for them as part of the body and the sin issues that are tied up in that, I think it's way easier to move forward and say, okay, I've got to address this because it's hurting the body and it's hurting you.
Yeah. And don't abandon the high road of Christ-likeness in the process, because people are going to dip down and go into the mud. Don't join them in the mud.
Yep.
Stay with it. It's going to be hard, especially if things sort of blow up a little bit. Stay the course. 5 years later, people will be seeing, oh, look, we're in a healthier spot now. Or, oh, I'm seeing something in that person. Maybe that's what they were seeing. You're going to deal with criticism. You're going to deal with opposition. Take a long game view. If you do have to confront it, and in a way that causes some contention in the church. So.
The last thing, just as we finish up, we've talked a lot about all of this. Sometimes, I don't know why this happens all the time. Don't underestimate the power of prayer.
Yeah.
And the need to depend on the work of the Spirit in you and His wisdom, not your own. In all these situations, whether it's the stuff with our spouse, the stuff with church bosses, the stuff with just coming into revitalization and triaging.
Yeah.
If you just look at it and you're like, well, I'm going to decide to do this, and maybe they're wise decisions, but maybe they're not the thing that God wants you to work at first. You've got to realize that you are not the one changing things.
Yeah.
And so you need to, especially for our guys who revitalize, you might be the only one there. As the one that God sent there to try to help this church, make sure that you are daily and often taking these things to God and saying, okay, this is where I think I should go. I'm going to use wisdom. If I'm going to run into something, please show me. So
I've got an alliteration for you.
I don't know.
Patience, prayer, preaching, and plurality. Oh, that was so good. That was so good. Okay, so patience.
Good Baptist.
Yes. Be patient. Saturate yourself in prayer. Preach the word, and don't underestimate the power of proclaiming. Proclaim. There we go. Proclaim, not just preach. Proclaim. Proclaiming God's word, and plurality. Like, I don't think in that situation with that church boss, I don't think I made any decisions in isolation.
Yeah.
There were those two guys.
Yep.
That
accountability is really important.
Yeah.
Staying above reproach.
That's not a P word. It's got to be plurality, because you can't have PPPA.
No, I'm just explaining what plurality means. You can have all your P's. I don't like it.
I don't like it either, but it's fun to annoy you with it. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully this was helpful. It's weird to reflect back on.
I know, right? It's kind of strange being on maybe that's the way we'll close this out. Like, we still have struggles as a church. We still have things that need to be addressed, and things that need to be worked on, areas where we need to grow in health and all of that. So don't hear me say that, but, so this is I'm in year 6 here, and there were times in years 1 through 4 that I was ready to quit. Like, I was ready to bail, even 5. Yeah. Looking back on, like, just some of these questions and things, like thinking through, I've made a lot of mistakes, and seeing God be gracious in a lot of ways in overcoming those mistakes. But looking back on it, it was never as bad as it seemed when I was walking through it. And it seemed like hopeless. It seemed like it was impossible. It's so discouraging. Just keep pushing forward. Like, put your head down and continue to press in and love the people and preach the word and pray for the people and pray for the church, and continue to just be there as long as God allows you to be there, and just keep pressing forward. Like, I enjoy coming to church now. I didn't used to. So and enjoy those seasons where you do enjoy it, because they're fleeting. They can go away, right? We joke around, like, the seasons of turmoil. There's a cycle of, like, turmoil, a little bit of peace, turmoil, a little bit of peace. The seasons of peace are increasing, and the seasons of turmoil are decreasing.
Yeah.
That just comes with time and consistency and a shepherd approach to the body. So don't give up. If you're struggling, don't quit. Keep pressing forward. Press into God. He'll sustain you. Be a Christian hedonist. Seriously, like, there's times where I didn't have joy in anything but God. And I know you're in the same boat. So, yeah, just keep going.
I don't really think there's anything to add. Like,
except for join us next week.
Yeah, exactly. I would just don't be afraid. Like, we've talked about this, but it can be really important to just reach outside of the confines of your body.
Yeah.
If you're struggling and you don't feel like you can trust anyone, we've got there's a great network of guys around here
Yeah.
that we can bounce things off of. So make sure the thing that makes it hard would make everything that we've gone through way harder is if I would have been doing it by myself.
Yeah.
Or you would have been doing it by yourself.
Yeah.
So sometimes all we need to pick up our head and keep moving forward is somebody alongside us to help pick our head up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So find somebody.
And read the Psalms a lot. The
It's
Psalms are really helpful. Seriously.
They are very good.
Yeah. So anyway, we don't have anything to add, but here's 4 more things.
That's how it is, though.
It is.
Like, things come to mind. So,
all right, that's great. So let us know in the comments what you think, if you got any input or thoughts, if you've walked through anything like this. Also, send us questions at pastordiscussions@gmail.com. We'd love to interact with them more in the future. And go to our website. You can like us on Facebook. If you like the show, do us a favor, do us a solid, go to iTunes and give us an honest rating and help us to reach more people. I know there's a lot of pastors out there that could be encouraged by some of this, so share it with them. And yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome.
The end.
Well, next time we talk, John will have another child.
I will have another child.
You'll be a family of 5.
I already have another child. They're just already, not yet.
Yeah, there you go.
It'll be fully realized.
So we'll talk a little bit about that and how you're not sleeping. Well, you're sleeping.
I sleep just
Carly's
fine.
not sleeping. So. All right. So join us next time for the next episode of the Pastor Discussions podcast, your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.